This is Mike Smith. Welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we're looking at batch rendering. So if you've completed an animation, the final stage is to batch render that. Now batch rendering takes quite a long time because Maya needs to actually render and save every single frame individually, and then you can create a movie out of an image sequence. So you might need to leave your machine rendering for several hours or overnight, sometimes even longer, depending on the complexity of your scene. So in this example I've got 96 frames, that's 4 seconds of just this is an old animation I made a few years ago. It's actually for sale on some other websites, but I'm just using this for this demo. Now there's quite a few things you need to check, so make sure first of all your project folder is set. Make sure you've done some play blasts to double check the speed and the timing of your animation, and then also make sure you've got some cameras set up with a resolution gate, so we can see my resolution gate here, so we know exactly what's going to render. If you're not sure about any of those, have a look at my previous tutorials just to make sure everything's set up. There's nothing worse than leaving your machine for several hours or maybe even a few days to render and then finding out it's not worked and you have to do it all over again. So take your time, double check everything first, then we can actually begin adjusting our settings. Now a quick tip is, if you've got a physical sun and sky and you've created your own cameras, you might find the lighting doesn't work through those cameras. So what we need to do is go into your outliner, select your sun direction or your physical sun and sky, have a look in your attribute editor and select the Maya Physical Sky 1 tab, scroll right the way down to the bottom and then click here where it says update camera connections, and that will fix any problems you've got. So just double check that first. Now we can actually have a look at our render settings. So go up to Window, Rendering Editors, and then Render Settings, and from the top up here where it says render using Mental Ray, double check you're using the correct plugin. So most of you are probably using Mental Ray, just double check it says what you want it to up here. Then go to your Common tab and we can now work our way down. So first of all, a lot of this we can leave at the default settings. There's just a few things you need to check. Your file output, we can see we've got a name here. Now I've just called this scene engine/engine test, and below that, image format Maya IFF. Now that's my preferred format. You might want to play around with some other ones, but in this demonstration I'm just using IFF. And then you can see it says frame and animation extension, name, and then it says single frame. Now if you leave it on single frame, it won't batch render, it will just render one frame. So we need to change that to anything other than single frame. And you can see you've got lots of different options here. They're really just different orders of the name, the number, and the extension, so you can choose really whichever one you want. For simplicity, I'll choose name.number, and if I select that, it gives you a few more options. But first of all, if we look at the top up here, it says where it's going to be saved to, so it's already set to my project folder, and the file name in this case is called engine/engine-test.1 up to engine-test.10. So by default it will render all 10 frames, the first 10 frames. And if you want to change how this looks, so where it is .1 and then .10, you can actually change what's called the frame padding. So if we have a look at that down here, by default it's on 1. If I change that to say 3, my file names now are engine-test.001 up to .010. Now there's no right or wrong. I tend to choose one higher than the total number of digits in the frames. So for example, if you had 100 frames, that's 100, so you've got 3 digits, so set your frame padding to 4. That will give you a 0 in front of every frame number, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer when you look down a list of long numbers. So in this example I've got 96 frames, so I've got a 9 and a 6, that's 2 digits, so I'll set my frame padding to 3. And if we have a look at the next few settings, we've got the frame range. Start frame on 1, end frame by default is 10, so we can change that to 96. Press enter, and then double check at the very top our file name. We can see now it's .001 up to .096, so we've got the full range there. Scroll down a bit more, and now you've got your renderable cameras. By default it will just render in perspective. You've probably got some other cameras set up, so now you can select that drop down menu and choose whichever cameras you have. I just have one camera, it's just called the default camera 1. If I select that, it will now render all 96 frames looking through camera 1. If you want to render other cameras at the same time, we can go back to this drop down menu, add a renderable camera, and then choose another one. So I could choose perspective as well as camera 1. Now that means after the batch render you'll have 2 folders, one called camera 1 with 96 files in, and then another one called perspective or persp with another 96 frames in. So obviously it will take longer to render, so just bear that in mind. If you change your mind and you don't want 2 cameras, just click on the dustbin next to that. So if I want to delete perspective, click on the dustbin, and it will only delete perspective from your settings here. It won't delete the camera from your scene. Okay, below that you've got your image size or your resolution. You probably already set that up, just make sure it's on what you actually want. And that's all we really need for now. There are a few more settings further down. You might want to have a look there, but you can leave those at the default if you're unsure. So double check those settings. We can now close this, and it's a good idea now to save your scene or save it as a different name. That way if you go to a different computer, or if you have to go away for lunch or you have to go somewhere else and come back, Maya will remember those settings as long as you've saved the scene. Next thing to do, go right up to your menu set and change that to rendering. Now we can go up to render at the top of the screen, the word render, not the render button. Go down to batch render and click on the option box. And there's only really 1 or 2 things in here you need to check. The only thing I tend to change is at the bottom here under network settings, where it says render on network machines. I tend to untick that. If you're working in an environment with lots of computers all networked up, if you're only able to render on one of those machines, untick render on network machines. It just speeds things up a little bit. Now if you're sure everything is set, you've double checked everything, you can go ahead and click on batch render and then leave it to it. So once you've done that, obviously save everything first. If you have a look at your project folder, so if I open mine up, inside your project folder, while it's batch rendering, you'll see you have an images folder. Inside that you'll see all of your IFF files. Your computer, depending on what it is, might see these as audio files. They're really not, so don't worry. Just leave it to complete the batch render. So once that's finished, if we have a look at this, I've got all 96 frames. Let it render the lot. Then if you go into your applications folder, so if I go to my Autodesk folder here, go into whichever version of Maya you're using. So in this case I've got 2015. Then you've got an application here called F-Check or Frame Check. If you open up F-Check, I can just close these down for now. So if I open up F-Check, I've already got everything ready. It will open up with just a blank white screen. Simply go to File at the very top, open Sequence, and then choose the very first IFF file in your sequence. So 001 or whatever you've called it. It will take several seconds, maybe even a couple of minutes to open everything up in your F-Check playback window, and you might find it plays back too fast, sometimes too slow, other times quite jumpy. It really depends on the machine. That's not a problem yet, and you'll find it will play automatically, so this is far too quick. If I press space, I can stop that. You can actually try in your settings here, you can untick every frame, and it should, if you press space again, it should play back in 24 frames per second, but on older machines, or if it's not very powerful, it does still jump. Don't panic at that stage, it's not a problem. Just press space to stop that. Go back up to File, Save as Movie, and I've already got this saved, but if I go ahead and click on that again, if we give this a name, so I'll just call it 1 for now, click on Save, it brings up these options here, No Transformations and Use Transformations. I tend to find using No Transformations gives a slightly sharper, clearer video. Try it for yourself. Once you click on that though, or either one of these, it will take several seconds, maybe even a couple of minutes, depending on your machine, to actually save the movie file, and you might find the file is quite big, so you may have to compress it down afterwards. So once you've done that, you should get quite a nice clear video. If I go up to View and set this to Loop, it should play back nice and smooth, and at that stage, if you need to compress it in QuickTime, just go up to File, Export, and then you can choose whichever resolution you like. So in this case it says 720, just click on that and it will compress it right down for you. Keep the original file just in case, and you'll find if you have several cameras, you'll need to do that for each image sequence, and then you can take all of your footage into another application and you can actually put those together as a show reel or another movie if you like. Okay, so take your time with batch rendering, double check your settings, do some play blasts, double check your project folder is set, check your lighting, check your cameras, then only once you're really happy, set it to batch render. Okay, keep a note of the settings you use just in case anything goes wrong, and have some fun with it.